You are listening to Science Coast with Mallory Havens and
Chris White.
And today our guest is
Cindy Howard.
Welcome back, Cindy. So just as a reminder, you are the chair of the Computer Science Department and Engineering and Mathematical Sciences. Sorry, I just said computer science and excluded the other fields.
It's a long name.
And today we wanted to talk about women in STEM and how we get more women into STEM. So for me, as a biologist, there's pretty even distribution between men and women in the biological sciences or life sciences, but that's not true in any other of the STEM fields. So do you have any thoughts as to why you think not as many women are involved in other areas?
Well, speaking, as a computer scientist, I think some of it is just how the field is portrayed. So if you watch a movie with a hacker in it, it is always some guy in the basement typing a bunch of stuff in text into a terminal.
Green letters on a black screen.
Right, and very quickly because it's urgent, and they seem to know all the magic codes. And I think that's not appealing to a lot of women.
Right. Being a basement dweller.
Yeah.
Not just that, a loner.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times the people the men that are portrayed in these types of roles tend to be isolated.
Yeah.
And I think that's a much bigger turnoff for a lot of people.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would agree.
Yeah, socialization is really important, and there is some truth to the fact that women tend to be slightly more communal than, based on how we're socialized, than men.
You're trained to be social.
Right.
More so than guys are.
Yeah. I would say one of my hypotheses as to why the life sciences have a fair number of women in them now is the life sciences used to not be taken as seriously as the other fields. I'm sure you've heard the...
I'm giving her weird looks right
Yeah.
now.
I'm sure you've heard the jokes about there's memes out there of cats sleeping on biology textbooks, and the saying is Kitty prefers the soft sciences, and which is not very flattering or nice. But I think until the 1950s, a lot of biology was based on working with animals or field work or classification, and it wasn't really until the advent of molecular biology, so studying molecules within cells and looking much more fundamentals of how things worked, that it started being recognized as going to be revolutionary as physics had been, or as chemistry had been at different points in history, where we started to be able to break apart how life is working more, but it had seemed approachable, maybe.
Which is interesting because I've always thought that biology was way too complicated. And your notion about, molecular biology, it's when you start to get into what's happening at the cellular level, it's so complex. There's so many interactions. There's so many dependencies. There's so many variables.
Right.
It's just too complicated for me. And I could never wrap my brain. I needed something that was simpler. I needed something. So that's why I went into elementary particle physics. And it's I can understand that.
Right.
And because it's relatively straightforward, there's a limited number of particles. There's a limited number of ways they can interact with each other. And I could hypothesize and see in my head how these interactions could happen. But in biology, it's oh my gosh. I mean, how do you even begin to start unraveling all of this stuff?
I hear what you're saying. I also think the draw I had towards the biological sciences was I wanted to help figure out how diseases worked and how to make treatments or therapies for them. So it was more of a motivation of trying to make a positive impact on the world.
That also has a connection to other human beings.
Right.
Because I can probably tell you that neutrinos don't have a big impact on most humans.
I mean, they torture me every morning, but... What was your draw to computer science, Cindy?
I like the creativity, which is not what a lot of people think, right? They don't think computer science is particularly creative.
I would think you would have to be, because you're coming up with new systems and models and new ways to use language.
Right. And it is. It's so Chris made a funny face when I said that people don't think it's creative. I think they don't. They think it's a bunch of nerds typing in a computer, and they're not really creating anything. They're just typing in the magic codes that they somehow have learned.
Maybe it's because I've been exposed to enough computer science, and as a grad student, I had to do some coding.
Yeah.
That I reacted the way that I did, because it's, from my perspective and my experience, it's all creative. You basically have a blank sheet in some sense, and you have to write code which does very flexible things. And the only way to do it and also when I was younger, you had to worry about how much CPU power you consumed. You couldn't, just, use as many resources as you wanted to. So you had to be very clever. And the only way to be clever in this sense was to be creative in how you coded.
Right. So I think that's what was appealing to me, is this idea that you can write something and solve a problem.
Yeah, it's kind of like the analogy of with computer language and creating something. A person can have the entire English language, but what they write in a book or a novel is unique to them and their ideas and what you get out of it, which is same as their codes to do functions, but how you put them together creates something completely original.
And there's garbage code, just like there's garbage
words.
No, not the word, but yes, I mean articles can, people can read it and go, yeah, that's a piece of garbage. I mean, the same thing is true with code and algorithms.
Yeah,
That's true. That's true.
I think sometimes in the sciences too, it's maybe more straightforward in computer science because your code works or it doesn't. But there's a lot of data interpretation that happens in other fields that you can be completely wrong. Like you can have the data, but your understanding of how it works might be wrong. And over the time where we gather more information, we have to refine what that actually meant.
Same kind of thing, though, in coding, because just because your code runs doesn't mean that it's correct.
Okay. Can you go into that a little bit more? I think I don't understand computers.
Well, the fact that it runs just means that you've used the correct syntax.
Okay.
So think of it as you've written sentences that have, noun, verb kind of thing,
Okay.
right? But the sentence doesn't have to make sense.
Okay. So it can do a function, but maybe it's not the right function, not conveying the right idea.
Or maybe it's only right some of the time.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Do you think that the advent of social media and the fact that technology is basically infiltrating all aspects of life is going to be attractive to drawing more women into coding and computer science?
That's a good question. I would hope so, but I'm not sure. Because, again, I think social media can be pretty brutal, right?
Right.
And so people are not always kind. And if you, post on a discussion board about, some issue you're having with your code or whatever, you might not get a nice answer. And so I think in some ways it can be dissuading, There's definitely a sexist bent at times.
Not just sexist, that sounds like bullies in
Yeah.
some sense, that people are actively bullying other people.
Yep.
Well, that's what people do with social media, right? You can hide behind a computer screen and use as many filters as you want to appear however you want to appear. That's why I avoid social media.
So what are some of the ways that those of us who are working at institutions, all three of us here, at universities can make it more palatable for women to pursue these tech degrees?
One of the things that we try to do is to emphasize the creative aspect of it. So, I think even in our intro classes now, we do some group work and they build small applications and things like that, and they can get that feeling of what you could do with this degree. I think the group work that we've been doing has helped a lot to make to help women feel like they belong, because now they're part of a group. They see that it's not this, solo endeavor, right? But it's something you do as part of a group.
And role modeling, right?
Yeah.
Showing that you're a successful computer scientist who happens to be a woman and in a position of leadership.
How young should we go in order to start showing like young girls that this is potentially something that they might be interested in? I noted when I used to go do science demos at schools, the third and fourth and fifth graders were all very enthusiastic, and lots of young girls were saying, I'm going to be a scientist, I'm going to do this. And then when I got into the junior high and early high schools, it was like a complete flip. And it was just an entirely different situation.
Yeah, and I think they start being more aware of what their peers think, and that's what I think dissuades girls. I think it's important to keep, we have kids do biology and chemistry and all that in high school. We have made progress in having computer science in high school curriculum, but not as much. And I think just making sure that everyone is exposed to it and gives us a better opportunity to have more women join.
Don't you run some summer camps?
Can
you tell us about that?
I do. I run a program called Girls Create with Technology. And in this program, we really do emphasize the creative aspect of computing. So our target audience is late middle school, early high school girls. We have monthly sessions where they do different things. And I think the one this Saturday is with these small robots that we have, so they can program the robots to do different things. The summer camp, the main focus of that camp is generally building and programming a robot. So we have these microcontrollers, and then they actually build the robot out of craft material. So there's hot glue and paint and googly eyes.
And pom-poms.
And pom-poms. No glitter. No
Oh,
glitter.
yeah.
Glitter is, I don't know.
You can't clean it up. It makes a lot of sense to... You would still have to put mechanical stuff in the robot, though, right?
Right. So you can glue an arm onto a rotator, a motor, and have the arm move, or a tail wag or something. So they'll make animals and the tail will wag. Or so we have different types. They're called servo motors that they can control to make it actually move.
So the lessons that you've learned, you've done this how many years?
I want to say it might be 20 years. No, about 10 years. I think 10 years.
It's been at least 10 years because you've done it ever since I've been here.
Yeah.
So for a decade of teaching these summer, workshops for middle school and high school girls, what do you think is the most effective way of reaching them? What has worked most effectively for you?
I think this creativity and letting them work in groups is probably the things that have the most influence on them. They can see other girls doing this, and I think that's important. I know that a lot of these computing camps fill up with boys, and it's a lot harder for a young girl to be in a group with all boys.
Especially in middle school. Oof, what a time.
Right. So it's nice to have this situation where they see girls. We have students at Lewis as mentors, so they see there are some boys, but girls as well. And so they can see that there are role models for them. They can see someone doing something that they might want to do.
So I'm going to say something controversial just for the sake of putting it out on the table. Would you think it worthwhile to create gendered sections for certain classes, maybe early in the program? So if you're having students come in, and you would have a section which would be primarily for women and a different section that would be primarily for men, to avoid potential, negative interactions that women might experience from the male students.
I'm not sure about that. I think it would be better to create sections based on ability or experience. I think the thing that dissuades a lot of women, but also some men, is when you have a student who has a lot of experience in computing but no formal classes. So they start out in Intro to Computer Science, but they have the answer to everything.
Yeah, I would be intimidated by that.
Right. And so I think it would be better to, test them and have them group them by ability instead of by gender.
So why don't we do that?
It's hard to implement, right? It's people's schedule, and I guess we could offer 2 sections at the same time. We have typically offered in the fall anyhow 4 sections of our intro class, all at different times to accommodate student schedules.
Also, you can accidentally create a class system too if students realize, oh, I'm in the section where people have way less answers and knowledge than that section, so I don't belong in that regard, you know? It can be because students are going to talk to each other.
Okay,
That's
so
true.
So I'm going to flip to the other side. So I was deliberately being provocative, so I'm going to flip to the other side. What can we do to help train the boys to stop being the way that they are? No, I'm serious.
So at the advent of man, back in the...
Are we talking about the biblical story of Adam and Eve?
Yep. You can have your rib back. Anyway.
And you're going to throw it at me, aren't you?
I think that's really, there's just been so much socialization over, ever since humans have existed, mostly based on the fact that women are the ones who have to go through pregnancy and are the ones that had to, at least before the days of formula, had to nurse the child. So it limited what exactly you could do, and a lot of women used to die in childbirth. So that created the social structures that we have today, which it's all a socialization. And I think it's very hard to undo all of human history quickly, but a lot of exposure of people to other people and seeing skills and ability, and just I think the new generation of at least millennial parents are working really hard to not give their kids just gender norms off the bat. Not everyone, obviously, but I constantly tell my son there's no boy things and girl things, there's just things. And he will learn a social construct and come back and be like, but I'm a boy, so I can't. And I will be like, nope, that's not true. Anybody can do anything. So I'm trying, at least.
So as an institution of higher learning, shouldn't we be better at calling this behavior out when we see it happening? Because you're doing it with your son, right? And as a mother to your child, you're helping, kind of break that human history of gendered stereotypes. Is there a role for faculty at universities in these introductory classes to basically step in and break the dynamic that's happening?
I guess if it were overt, right? If there was somebody, and we did have a situation once where a student, a male student, said to another male student something about some girl's paper was left out, and one said to the other, oh, we can copy off of hers, and the other one said, well, she's a girl, we don't want to copy off of hers. And so we did have that situation once, and those students were talked to. But it's really hard in a less, when it's less obvious, right? I think what helps is when we have really strong women, really good students, and the boys see that there are girls that are good at this too.
Right. And as a faculty member, when you do see something overt, it's good to call it out, not just necessarily pull someone aside, but because other people have overheard, and just say, why would you say that? And if you have a hard time confronting it directly, if you say, why would you say that, they're forced to think about why they said that and realize that they're having a bias. And if they want to dig deeper into that hole, you can keep throwing dirt back in on top of them. But I think that's a important thing, is if you don't necessarily have the words to completely combat any kind of bias that you see, or racism or whatever, step one, easiest thing you can do is say, why would you say that?
So Cindy, what would be your advice to a young woman who is interested in pursuing a tech degree, maybe computer science, maybe cybersecurity, as they are looking to matriculate at a university? What advice would you give them?
I think it's important for them to know that they are not alone, and that they're no less prepared than a vast majority of the boys. So they're starting at the same level as everyone else, and they're more than capable of doing it.
Yeah, you just have to have that confidence going in. And with that, The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Lewis University. The material and information presented here is for general information purposes only. The Lewis University name and all forms and abbreviations are the property of its owner, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service. This podcast was produced in the WLRA podcast studios at Lewis University. Visit lewisu.edu for more information about Lewis University. This has been Science Coast with Mallory Havens and
Chris White.
And
Cindy Howard.
Thanks for listening.